wonderful to have Rob Schwartz on the podcast. Rob is a certified hypnotist who offers between life soul regressions to help you heal and discover your life plan, a plan you created for yourself before you were born. He is the author of 3 books, Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love. And his books have been translated in 25 languages. Rob, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you, Emily. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So, one thing that I'm curious about is your journey. From what I understand is that you were, in your 40s and in a marketing corporate job and just, so curious to know how you made the switch to doing what you're doing in the world today.
Well, this all happened within a few months back in 2003. As you said, I was in the corporate world at that time, basically doing corporate marketing and communications. I did not like that at all. It was a very unfulfilling life. And what was worse is that it didn't feel like it was a unique expression of who I am. In other words, if I fell off the face of the earth, they could plug somebody else into that role and it wouldn't even matter who it was and carry right along. And I felt there was something else I was supposed to be doing, but I didn't know what it was. And then things started to happen. The universe intervened. The first thing that happened is that I had my first session ever with a psychic medium. Now, I wasn't even sure at that time in my life if I believed that mediumship was a valid thing, but really I was desperate. So I tried it. And right off the bat, the medium says to me, your spirit guides are here. They would like to speak directly to you. She starts to channel them. And the first thing they said was, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. And I said, well, why in the world would I have done that? And they said, well, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. But then they launched into this very lengthy and detailed monologue in which they told me why I had planned all my biggest challenges. And what was really impressive about this is that they knew what all my challenges had been without me telling them anything, nor had I told the medium anything before the session. So as you can imagine, that got my attention. And then within just a few weeks of that, I was introduced to a woman who had the ability to go into trance and channel her higher self. So I spent about 15 hours talking to her higher self about how pre-birth planning works. Her soul explained it to me in great detail. And that 15 hours of channeling really served as the foundation for all 3 books that I went on to write. And then the most impactful thing of all, which happened within just a couple of weeks of these other things, I had a spiritually transformative experience in which I was doing nothing more than walking down the sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. And every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love washed over me. And I call it unconditional love because those are the closest words we have in the English language, but it doesn't even begin to touch what I was experiencing. And so this went on only for about an hour, but it changed everything. I was caused to know, as Neil Donald Walsh likes to say, I was caused to know in this experience that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. And it changed the way I think of myself, every other person, the nature of the universe. Now, what I didn't know at that time was why this was happening. That became clear a couple of years later, because by that time I had looked at a number of people's pre-birth plans for Your Soul's Plan, the first book. And I found that every pre-birth plan, no matter how challenging it might be, was always based on complete unconditional love for every person involved. And so that experience walking down the sidewalk, that was intended to give me complete confidence that what I was eventually going to find was true. So that's basically what happened. And then the combination of those 3 things got me to say, okay, I'll leave the corporate world. I'll write a book about pre-birth planning. And then 3 years later, Your Soul's Plan came out.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm so excited to dive in and to explore. So, Rob, in your experience, does everybody have a pre-birth plan? And what does that process look like?
As far as I know, everybody has a pre-birth plan. Essentially, the process consists of the soul in consultation with guides, masters, angels, and God or source. The soul creates the life plan. Then the soul creates the personality, which is a portion of the soul's energy that will go into the physical body. The personality is then informed as to what the life plan consists of. Now, at that point, the vast majority of people say, that sounds great, sign me up, and then they come into body. But there's a very small percentage who start to feel human emotions like fear or worry or doubt, principally doubt that it might be too much for them. If you express fear or doubt or worry, then the pre-birth plan is amended until you're okay with it. So most people then agree to the amendments, whatever they are, and then they incarnate. There's a small percentage of the percentage who felt doubt, who continue to feel doubt. And if you continue to express that, then it's further modified. Bottom line being, nobody has to do anything that they don't want to do.
Okay. And then is it possible to modify during the course of an incarnation?
Yeah, we all do that quite a bit. The main way it happens is that when you're asleep, you leave the physical body in the astral or spirit body, cross back over to the other side, you meet with all the significant people in your life. And you're essentially asking one question, which is, are we learning what we came here to learn? If the answer is yes, then carry on. But if the answer is no, then you talk about what changes do you need to make so that you can learn what you came here to learn.
Okay. So the way that I understand it is that we have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. We essentially have, infinite plans, and they're adjusted probably in each present moment based upon the decisions that we're making. How would you say, people can live their plan A or close to that or fulfill their potential here? And how often does that occur?
Well, if plan A is literally the highest vibrational pre-birth plan, then I would say that happens very rarely, and it's essentially only Jesus, Buddha, and other beings like that who are executing plan A. You don't expect yourself, when you're agreeing to the life plan, to execute plan A. Your soul isn't asking that of you. The guides aren't asking that of you. They're just asking you, live the highest vibrational plan you can. So how do you do that? Well, there are a number of ways to do that. The main way is whenever you have to make any kind of decision, whether big or small, ask yourself, what would love, with the capital L, what would love do now? And then whatever that is, do it. If you do that consistently, you will execute a very high vibrational pre-birth plan. The other main ways to do it, feel and express gratitude, do whatever excites you and brings you joy, and do whatever creates time distortion, or what some people call the flow state. So probably for everybody listening, there's at least one activity that when you do it, it will seem to you like only 10 minutes have gone by, but when you look at the clock, it's 2 hours later. Anything that creates that kind of time distortion, there's something there that's part of your pre-birth plan.
I love that. Those are such helpful tips. And I guess I'm wondering, in your experience, what are the things that most commonly sort of, derail us or get us off track from, the highest vibrational plan?
Well, the main thing would be fear and also conditioning, which are very closely related, because a lot of the things that we fear, we've been conditioned to fear. So if you make fear-based decisions, you're essentially making the worst choice you can possibly make in every moment. And then you execute a very low vibrational plan. And you've got to rise beyond your conditioning. Your parents, society, teachers at school, they're all going to tell you certain things are true and certain things are false. And a lot of what they tell you is actually false itself, at least from the perspective of the soul. So if you really want to activate a high vibrational life plan, at some point, you've got to recognize that a lot of this conditioning is false, and then choose an alternative.
What would be an example of some of the cultural conditioning that your soul would, innately know is false?
Well, probably the single most common thing is, I have to work hard in order to earn money. No, you don't. The society tells you you do, but that is an extremely limited and limiting way of looking at it. The truth of the matter is that the universe is infinitely abundant. And once you know that and make decisions that are high vibrational in nature, then you draw the abundance to you. You just allow it in.
That's such a great example, and that's one that goes pretty deep.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love that. And, I'm curious about, because you shared in the beginning about working in a corporate job that you weren't finding a lot of meaning and purpose in. And do you find the idea that we must, have an occupation, which is something that, through society, has been ingrained in many ways, that kind of derails us in a sense from our life plan, or is it in many ways supportive?
It depends on how you look at it. I'll speak for myself as an example. I felt lost the first 40 years of my life. And then in 2003, when I had those experiences, that's when I was 40 years old and everything changed. And one of the reasons I felt lost is that I believed that conditioning. I have to have a career. I'd better pick something. And so I ended up sort of picking the least objectionable option. There was nothing that I really felt compelled to do. Now, I believe that the first 40 years of my pre-birth plan were intentionally left very open like that, so that I could do whatever I wanted and, essentially be lost and learn through being lost. So this is only in retrospect that I have this insight. If I had known that during those years, I think they would have been a lot more enjoyable than they actually were.
Yeah, that's so true. And I can relate to that on many different levels. And my career took me through business and marketing, but it's just interesting how those skills kind of weave back into, what I'm doing now. So in some ways it is all, so divinely orchestrated.
Yeah, well, for me, I was in marketing as well, and those skills have come in handy in what I'm doing now. But again, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I hadn't bought into the conditioning that I have to have a career. It would have freed me up to choose something less corporate and just more fun, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're doing your, regressions, how detailed does it come through? In other words, sometimes I think of life as, I'm not sure if you're familiar with those choose your own adventure books, where it's kind of like there's a multitude of different endings that you can read as you're going through, and just having this such variation or flexibility depending on, basically our free will. What has your experience been, and how much is really predetermined versus, playing out as we go?
Well, the broad parameters of the life are predetermined. So you choose your parents, and obviously once you're born, you can't reverse that choice. Uh, there are certain other choices that are set in stone. For example, if you plan to have a physical handicap that can't be treated by medical science at birth, then short of what we call a miracle, you will have that handicap for the duration of that lifetime. But the number of things that are set in stone like that is actually very few. Most things are planned as possibilities or probabilities. And whether or not they become reality depends upon your free will decisions. So if you think of it like a pyramid, and so the contours of the pyramid are set by your pre-birth choices of parents, physical handicap, things like that. But within the framework of the period, you can go this way, you can go that way, you can go down, you can go up. All of that is free will decisions.
Hmm, I love that. Something that I've been really curious about recently is, this idea that we can actually transcend our blueprint. I believe we have multiple blueprints, but this idea that we can really, transcend even what we plan for our soul based on, perhaps, opening our heart, or really practicing forgiveness, or, the divine virtues that you share about. Have you seen instances of this?
I'm married to somebody who has demonstrated that. I don't know if you're familiar with my wife's personal story, but she had extremely severe OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, for a number of decades, to the point where it was debilitating, and she might actually have come close to being institutionalized. And then through a series of spiritual pursuits and spiritual experiences, she became much more energetically sensitive and found ways to work with it and minimize it. She also had a great OCD therapist. And so over a period of many years, she got herself to a place where now it really doesn't impact her life or my life much at all. And when we've done personal channelings and talked to our guides or the ascended masters who guide us, what they told us is that the statistical probability of her getting from where she was to where she is now, it was close to zero. Not actually zero, but it was close. And they said it was very, very unlikely that the two of you would ever come together, because the only reason this is possible is that she essentially got herself over the OCD.
That is incredible. I have full body chills as you're telling that story.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just opens up so many possibilities in terms of, our potential. And, one thing that I am curious about that is I know that your wife is a channeler and you both are of such great service. I feel like sometimes as we step into more of our purpose or that which feels aligned to our soul, that, whatever physical ailments, they can sometimes be diminished through that process as well.
Well, I think that is in part what happened with her. She did such a magnificent job of raising her vibration that, and the OCD is at a low vibration, it was no longer compatible with where she was. And so most of it just dissolved over time.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings me to soul groups, which I wanted to ask you about, because my understanding is a soul group is, a group of beings that really incarnate on a regular basis together, play different roles, learn things, and they perhaps are at a frequency match. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. So as far as I know, there are generally 25 to 75 souls in a soul group. They're a frequency match, which is another way of saying they're at the same stage of evolution. And you and the members of your soul group take turns in different lifetimes playing every possible role for each other. So you'll be mother and daughter, father and son, husband and wife, brother and sister, teacher and student, even murderer and the one who is murdered. And at the soul level, there's no judgment of any of those roles. They're looked at as a play on a stage, which is essentially what life on Earth is. And you play these roles because you learn by playing them.
So what would a bump contract be?
Bump contract is a term used to refer to a relationship that is generally very brief, very intense, and has a big impact on the direction you take in life. So you set that up with somebody, at least one other person before you're born, and you essentially say to that soul, if I am off track and need to be quote unquote bumped back onto track, would you agree to do that? And the soul who makes that agreement plans to have, again, a very short but very intense relationship with you. And the nature of the relationship is such that it bumps you back onto the main path you wanted to take.
Okay, got it. So I want to back up, to the experience with your wife that you shared, and in that instance of her raising her vibration so significantly, it's almost like, does that change the soul group that she's, vibrating amongst, and or is that all sort of pre-planned?
Well, there's really only one being in existence in the universe. So we're all individualized expressions of the one. So anytime anybody does anything in terms of raising or lowering their vibration, literally everybody else is affected, usually in ways we can't see or even know about. So in her case, by raising her vibration so significantly, she might perhaps be ready to graduate from that soul group and go on to a more highly evolved soul group. Michael Newton, who founded the field of between lives regression, talks about that in some of his books. And she may very well end up doing that after this lifetime is over.
What about incarnating on other planets? Have you studied that much, and or do we go to learn this, similar lessons, or is it really this earth plane where, so much learning is done through, our...
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because on May 7th, my wife and I have a new workshop we're doing for the first time called Star Souls. A star soul is somebody who comes from a very far away civilization, usually one that is much more highly evolved than Earth. So when they get here, Earth often seems to them to be barbaric, nonsensical, cruel. They feel out of place. They don't feel like they can relate to the average person. They're not interested generally in the sorts of things the average person is interested in. And also they tend to bring very unique gifts with them, but a lot of times they either don't know what the gifts are or they don't know how to actualize them. So the whole intent of the Star Souls workshop is to help people understand where they came from, why they're here, what their unique gifts are, and how they can best actualize them in service to humanity.
I love that. You know, how amazing to be able to do that, because I feel there's so many that really, really, want to be of service, know that they're here for a significant reason. Yeah. And I know through your sharing, something that I found really, really interesting is that there's so many beings that want to incarnate here on Earth, even though, sometimes it feels difficult, and there is, sometimes the experience of people learning through suffering. What have you found about that? And, what is it like to incarnate on Earth during this time?
What I've been told in the channelings I did for my 3 books is that there were actually 3 times as many souls who wanted to incarnate now as available bodies. So you had to make a 1 in 3 cut to be here. And as I understand it, the way that decision was made is that if you were chosen, you had to have something specific to offer Earth's and humanity's ascension process. So, the world is filled with people who feel small, weak, powerless, helpless, insignificant. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. You made a 1 in 3 cut to be here, and you were chosen because you had something specific to offer the ascension process.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Because there are souls that, I know feel like they don't want to be here, like it is a tough, place to be. Um, how does that work exactly? And, like, would you say that, there's sort of a karmic wheel that plays out? Do beings have to um, reincarnate here on Earth?
My understanding is that nobody has to, but many of the people who say, I don't want to be here and I would never choose to come back, when they get back on the other side, they have a very different perspective on life on Earth. And from the other side, you know that an incarnation is actually very brief. Nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. And yet the wisdom becomes part of you literally for all eternity. So from that perspective, it actually does make sense that many souls would choose to come here, despite how difficult it is. And it is a tough school. My understanding is that Earth is literally the most difficult planet in our universe on which to have an incarnation.
Hmm, fascinating. Yeah, that does definitely resonate as true for me. And, just the fact that we are able to bring forth wisdom from incarnation to incarnation is such a beautiful, gift. What does that process look like to really deepen that remembrance? And how does, understanding our life's plan help with that process? Do you find that we build, from lifetime to lifetime, or is it really a matter of learning, very distinct divine virtues each time?
My understanding is that you have what you could call arcs of lifetimes. So an arc of a lifetime is a set of lives in which you work on more or less the same lessons. And then when you've mastered them to your satisfaction, you go on to a new arc of lives in which you attempt to master a new set of lessons. So you are very much bringing skills and wisdom from previous incarnations. And I think a lot of that is, I don't know exactly how they do it, but I think it's wired into our DNA so that you will awaken to your innate gifts at certain times in your life. It just seems to happen automatically.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, we can look at astrology as one indicator, one blueprint of that for sure, but there's, multitude. And whether it's a Kundalini awakening that we put in our path or, an accident of some sort, that certainly seems to be true.
Yeah, all of those things are planned. I should explain here for people who aren't familiar with the kind of hypnosis I do. It's
Mm.
called a between lives soul regression. You go through some preliminary steps to relax, then you go through a past life, and then the highlight of the whole experience, you get in front of what is called your council of elders. These are the beings who oversee your personal evolution. They know literally everything about you and everything you've ever done, and everything about the plan for the current lifetime. So the main questions people ask are, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How am I doing in terms of fulfilling my plan? And how can I better fulfill my plan? That's one of the main ways I get at people's pre-birth plans for the books.
I love that. And my understanding of the Council of Elders is, just really such a loving, group of beings that are supporting and assisting. And, there's not like you're doing it wrong or, this kind of energy at all. It's really just encouragement and unconditional love.
Yeah, and a lot of people, the first time they do a between lives soul regression, they're nervous because they think the council is going to judge them, evaluate them, criticize them. That is not how it's done. Those beings are very highly evolved. They're so highly evolved, it's really beyond our comprehension to understand. But they are unconditionally loving. They have absolutely no judgment of anybody. And they're really there in service to you. They want only to help you learn what you plan to learn. So people come out of a between lives regression and they say things like, I could tell that the council knew all the bad things I've done in this lifetime, but they had no judgment of me and they loved me unconditionally anyway. And for the average person, that's the first time since they came into body that they're experiencing truly unconditional love. So it's really a homecoming in a way.
Mm, so beautiful. What would you say the, most common divine virtues are that we're learning and studying here?
So let's first define what a divine virtue is. So when I went into people's pre-birth planning sessions for the books, I was able to hear the conversations they had with their guides and the others in their soul group when they planned their biggest challenges. And a lot of the planning of challenges revolved around a desire to cultivate and express certain qualities that are important to the soul. And I gave those qualities the name divine virtues. Over a period of years, I put together a list of the ones that came up the most often. I think there are now 28 or 29 on the list. Out of that list, the ones that come up the most often, one is something called self-referencing, which means you come to see yourself as the highest and best source of wisdom and knowledge for you. A lot of people do not live life like that. They think everybody else knows better than they do. From the soul's perspective, that is coming at life backwards. That is not what the soul wants. Courage is a big one that a lot of people are working on. And in my view, it's actually the most important. There's a quote, and I can't remember who it was that said this, but the quote is, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means no matter which virtues you're working on, you'll need courage to apply them when life tests you. And this is why I believe that courage is actually the single most important of all the virtues, because without it, you can't work on any of the others. And then I think I would throw self-love and unconditional love in the mix as well.
I love that so much. I definitely believe that I'm working on all of those, and I'm sure many people can relate to that as well. Yeah. Um, I wanted to ask you about personality. How much do you feel our personality kind of is carried through from incarnation to incarnation?
My understanding of the personality is that there's what you could call a central core of characteristics that defines the you across all lifetimes. But because conditioning is so powerful and because it varies so much from time period to time period, that central core, it ends up having certain qualities conditioned and wrapped around it in each of those lifetimes. Those are the quirks of the personality that are unique to that particular lifetime once you leave the body, those don't really go with you. It's just the central characteristics that continue on.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that I've, heard you talk about is sort of a soul plan that has gone awry. And, the example that you shared that I heard was Hitler. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, everybody asks about Hitler. What was his plan? Why did he do what he did? And because I get that question so much, I've asked Spirit about it in the channeling sessions. So what I was told, believe it or not, is that Hitler's pre-birth plan was to be a great spiritual leader. And so his soul equipped him to do that by giving him gifts like charisma, gifts of oratory and rhetoric. And as I understand it, there was actually a specific option in his pre-birth blueprint for him to spiritually inspire people through painting. You might know he liked to paint and was apparently quite good at it too. But again, we all have free will. He apparently had a very difficult childhood, and then he used his free will to go in exactly the opposite direction from what his soul wanted. The other question people always ask about Hitler is, where is he now and what has become of him? My understanding is he's back on the other side, and he is in essentially a psychotic state in which he is continually recreating his very painful death at the end of the Hitler lifetime as a form of self-punishment. So I've spoken directly to Jesus about this in the channelings, and I said, can you help him? And to my surprise, he said, I cannot assist him because he's in this psychotic state. He's going to have to work his way out of it on his own. And that's where he's at, apparently.
Wow. So perhaps, in that other form, this idea of self-forgiveness, of self-love is perhaps something that, yeah, I am curious about that. Obviously everybody is familiar with that example. How much do you feel, his spirit guides were helping or trying to, steer him in another direction?
I would imagine that, and I think this is true for anybody who goes in the quote unquote wrong direction. I would imagine that his guides were working double overtime, triple overtime. They were doing everything they possibly could. But the key thing to understand there, and this is true for every person on the face of the earth, your ability to hear your guidance depends wholly on your vibration. So because of the choices Hitler was making, his vibration was going down and down, lower and lower. And I think he pretty quickly got to a vibration where he just couldn't hear his guidance at all.
I think that's such an important distinction to make, that we can hear our guides ever more clearly as we continue to raise our vibration.
And that's one of the main reasons vibration is so important. The other reason, of course, is that it wholly determines your experience in life. If something's not a vibrational match to your vibration, it's not going to come into your experience. If it is a vibrational match, it will come into your experience. And that's one of the main reasons you want to get your vibration as high as it can be.
And how much would there be something like a miracle that would, help, steer us in the right direction, or if we're asking for, some type of divine intervention?
A Course in Miracles teaches that there's no order of difficulty among miracles. So I believe, I've done the course twice now, I believe that miracles happen all the time. We don't see it because we're not looking for it, and also because our definition of miracle is something really big and spectacular. But miracles really are things that on the surface seem to be statistically unlikely to happen. They don't necessarily have to be big, spectacular things. If the definition is that they are statistically unlikely to happen, then the truth of the matter is they're happening all the time, because spirit is not limited in what it can create.
Yes, and I really believe that it is through the belief, the faith, the trust, that we're able to see more miracles manifest.
Yeah, your belief system essentially determines your experience. And the way that third dimension is set up, it mirrors your beliefs back to you so that you can find out what your beliefs are. And then if some of them are false or they're just counterproductive in some way, you can identify them and then change them.
Yes, yes, that's such a great point. And that's something that I wanted to ask you about. It kind of relates to what we're talking about learning through challenges. And I feel as though, some of my greatest learnings have certainly been through challenging circumstances, through heartbreak, or through things like this. But, I believe also we have the capacity to evolve and grow, not necessarily through suffering and through challenging experiences. And perhaps, as we continue to expand and raise our vibration collectively, perhaps we'll see more and more of this. And, perhaps, you could think of previous times where this was more of the case. But what do you believe when it comes to this? Do you feel like challenges will always be a part, at least on this earth plane, and in terms of our learning?
That's a great question. I haven't really explored the long-term future of the Earth in the channeling sessions. My guess would be that over a long time period, learning through suffering will probably very slowly become less and less necessary. But the way the Earth School is set up right now, a lot of the learning is done through opposites, what I call a learning through opposites life plan, which is you plan to experience the exact opposite of what it is you want to eventually experience. For example, let's say you choose to deepen in compassion, which is one of the divine virtues. Well, then a very common choice would be to incarnate in a family where you will be treated with a profound lack of compassion. The absence of compassion in the external environment is intended to drive you within, where hopefully over time you cultivate self-compassion, and then sometime later in life, take the self-compassion and turn it outward in service to others. So a lot of the learning is like that through opposites. A lot of it is through having your heart broken open. And people don't like to hear that. But the fact of the matter is, there are many souls who learn best by having their hearts broken open through pain. And if you are one of those souls, you would choose to come to Earth at this point in linear time because that's how a lot of the learning is done here. In my second and third books, there's a lot of channeling from an ascended master named Aaron. And Aaron says, quote, "You do not come into the incarnation for comfort or convenience." And that is most surely true.
Mm, yes, yeah, so profound. What about somebody who is wanting, desiring a relationship, wanting that, divine partnership, but really finding themselves single for the majority of their life?
Well, my new book, Your Soul's Love, which came out last year, is all about the pre-birth planning of challenges specific to romantic relationships. And there's actually an entire chapter called Being Single about the subject you just mentioned. And what we find there is that the pre-birth intention of this particular person, who has been single almost all her life, now into her 60s, the primary pre-birth intention was to cultivate self-love. So her lesson is to realize that the great love of her life isn't somebody who's out there. The great love of her life is her.
Mm, yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And similarly, with infidelity, I know that's something that you cover in your book as well. Would you say that's, the heart open way of learning, or are there other, things that we're
Yeah,
learning?
it's the painful way of breaking the heart open. So in the infidelity chapter in Your Soul's Love, what we find out is that the subject of the chapter is a woman whose husband is back on the other side. When he was here in body, he had an extramarital affair. The woman he had the affair with is part of their soul group, and the three of them planned this together for different reasons of their own. But for the woman whose husband betrayed her, it was largely what you just said, to have her heart broken open. And she really did a magnificent job of forgiving her husband and also forgiving the woman he had the affair with. I think she really mastered what she came here to learn.
Hmm, beautiful. I want to, as we kind of wrap up, I would love to know just a little bit, some more examples, if you could share, of anybody that, is really kind of living their highest timeline, and maybe an example of that, and, some of the ways that they've really kind of stayed on course, so to speak.
Well, I have to come back to my wife. That's the example I know the best. It wasn't just that she overcame OCD. She grew up in a family that went church shopping. They went from one religion to another, and none of these really ever resonated with her. So then in midlife, she went through a number of years where she wasn't spiritual or religious. And then in order to cope with the OCD, she started to get into the work of Eckhart Tolle. And shortly after going into his work, she had an experience in which, and I don't know what she was doing there, but she was sitting in a closet in the dark, and she had an experience where the energy of the walls of the closet came alive, and she could see it undulating in front of her. And then things just moved on from there. She had more and more profound spiritual experiences. And then a couple of years ago, she started channeling. At first, I don't think she even realized that's what she was doing. It just seemed like new, interesting ideas were coming into her mind on her own. So she started writing them down. But then she started hearing, I don't think hearing voices is quite the right way to say it. It's more like a download of information. And then she puts words to it as best she can, which is not easy to do because the English language is actually quite limited from their perspective. But she mastered doing that over a couple of years. And, I think of her as one of the most unconditionally loving people I've ever met, possibly the most unconditionally loving. She's a role model for me in many ways. So that's a good example of somebody who activated a very high vibrational life plan.
That's a beautiful example. And I'm curious if you would be open to sharing, has it been in your soul's plan to be in divine partnership, prior to this incarnation?
It was in the plan in the sense that it was an option, but again, it was very statistically unlikely. Uh, Very, very little chance of it happening. It was just there as a remote possibility, but because of all the work she did over the years on herself, it was able to happen.
I really want people to hear this about the infinite possibilities that we have, to really understand how we're creating our lives in every now moment. Does anything kind of come to mind as I'm, sharing that?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is something that the beings of light have channeled through my wife. They say that think of life plans as a stack of sheets of paper. So each sheet is at a different vibration. The ones at the top of the stack are the highest vibration. The ones at the bottom are the lowest. And this stack is so huge, it has almost an infinite number of sheets of paper in it. The other way to look at it, one of the mediums I work with in my books, she says that when she goes into somebody's pre-birth planning session, Spirit shows her something that looks like an incredibly vast and elaborate flow chart. Well, what is a flow chart? It's a series of decision points. If you do A, then X happens. If you do B, then Y happens. Spirit shows her this flow chart that it is so vast and expansive, it's really beyond human comprehension. That flow chart represents the soul having taken into account the millions of free will decisions the personality could make.
Wow, those are such beautiful examples and really helps to visualize, how we're creating in every now moment. I love it.
Yeah, there's almost an infinite number of things you can do, regardless of what your pre-birth plan is. And once you know that, that's what it means to be empowered, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Rob, you mentioned your course that you have coming up in May. I'd love for you to share with listeners other ways that they can, find your books and work with you.
Well, the books again are Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love. You can find all of them in the store at yoursoulsplan.com. If you go there on the homepage, please sign up for the newsletter. That will keep you informed of all the offerings. If you click on the events page in the main menu, you'll see the schedule for the rest of the year. There's a 2-day workshop, Awakening to Your Life Purpose, Discovering Your Life Plan, May 21 and 22. In that workshop, we do the Divine Virtues exercise. We do a regression to contact loved ones on the other side, including pets, not just people. And then we do a group between lives soul regression in which you can ask literally any question about your life. And if it's for your highest good, get an answer. And then we do that workshop usually about every 6 weeks. We also do it later in the year in Spanish, German, and Polish. So for people who speak those languages first, there's opportunities there as well. And then there's always private sessions. There's a long wait. February of 2023 are the next openings. But if you don't mind waiting, a private session is a good way to go.
Amazing. I love that. All those sharings. Thank you. That brought up a question, which is about pets. And is that a part of their plan? Do they go through a similar process?
Yeah, there's actually a whole chapter about the pre-birth planning we do with animals. The pets chapter in the second book, Your Soul's Gift. The story there, it's a very poignant story of a soul who plans for reasons of its own to be a dwarf. She's actually 4 feet 8 inches tall in this lifetime. So that plan is put in place in the pre-birth planning session. And then her guides say to her, well, you know, people are going to ostracize you because you're a dwarf. And this will be particularly the case when you're a child in grade school. The other kids will be very cruel to you. We need to put supports in place to get you through this. What do you want to do? And the plan they come up with is that she will have so many unconditionally loving pets that no matter how the kids treat her at school, she's going to come home and be loved by them. And then all of these future pets come into the pre-birth planning session. They speak with tremendous intelligence. And they essentially say to her, we will love you unconditionally through this very difficult experience of being a dwarf. And that's what they did. The kids at school would tease her. She would come home in tears. And then she had a horse she had the ability to communicate telepathically with the horse. So the horse would say to her, well, jump on my back and let's go for a ride. And she had cats, dogs, a rooster named Crooked Beak. And all of these pets were there just to love her through the experience.
That's amazing. Yes, I call my puppy a messenger of love, and I think animals are such, ascension guides in so many ways.
Yeah, they really are. The average person thinks of animals as not particularly intelligent compared to human beings. But if you look at what they say in this woman's pre-birth planning session, for example, or what they say to anybody who can communicate telepathically with them, their intelligence is equal to ours, if not greater.
Yes. Yeah, that definitely resonates. Rob, I'm wondering, we are going through such transformational times right now, and I'm would love to hear if there's any sort of words of wisdom that you'd like to leave listeners with during this time.
Well, I think it's important to understand what's happening on the world now because of the ascension process. The planet and everybody who's going to stay on the planet are rising in vibration and frequency. So the effect that has is that anything that's of a lower vibration is going to come into our awareness so that we can bless it, thank it for whatever it's taught us, and then release it to spirit. So both as a civilization, humanity is processing all kinds of things. And that's why you see all these dramatic headlines in the news these days, but it's happening to every individual as well. Everyone is clearing out of their consciousness stored trauma, anger, lack of forgiveness, shame, blame, guilt, whatever the lower vibrational energy might be. It's going to come to conscious awareness now so that you can bless it, thank it, and release it. A lot of that work is very difficult to do. It's quite challenging to feel those feelings, but that's what organic healing is. It means you become consciously aware of those feelings, and by having them move through your conscious awareness, that in itself is the release. So essentially, this is where courage is vital. You have to have the courage to feel your feelings. As long as you're willing to do that, you will be able to ascend with the planet.
Such helpful advice for these times. Rob, thank you so much. I just want to
Oh, you're
honor you
welcome.
for your heart, your service, all the wisdom that you're sharing for humanity. Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. And thank you for having the podcast. I think you're bringing a lot of light into the world, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much.